Welcome to the Provo Municipal Council meeting. It is 5:30 p.m. on Tuesday, April 26, 2016. We're gathered in the City Center Conference Room at 351 West Center in Provo, Utah. This meeting is being broadcast live on YouTube, Provo Channel 17, where it will also be available for on-demand viewing. The Council requests that citizens help maintain the decorum of the meeting by turning off electronic devices, being respectful to the Council and others, and refraining from applauding during the proceedings of the meeting. We'll begin with the roll call. Mr. Parker?
Wayne Parker.
John Curtis.
David Harding.
Gary Winterton.
Kay Van Buren.
Kim Santiago?
Dave Sewell.
George Stewart.
Dave Connect.
Brian Jones. Cliff Strachan.
Thank you. The opening prayer and the Pledge of Allegiance will be given by our policy analyst, Ryan Harvey.
Our dear Heavenly Father, we come before Thee this evening for this council meeting and ask that Thy Spirit be with us and with the council members as they talk about an important issue that is facing our city. We are grateful for this opportunity to live in a country where we can elect our leaders and that we can make decisions, that those leaders can make decisions by voting on it. We're grateful for all that was given us, the abundance which we have in this wonderful city of Provo, and pray that Thy Spirit can be with us always as we strive to live as Thou would have us live. And we say these things humbly in the name of Thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
All rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Provo City lost a treasured member of its family over the weekend. Bart Simons, Water Resources Division Director, was often referred to as Provo's water expert. He was kind, dedicated, and hardworking. It's hard to believe that just last week we were praising him for his great protection and care of our water resources. He will be sorely missed by all. Please join us in a moment of silence in his memory. Thank you. Mayor Curtis, did you have something you wanted to say?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I, with all of you, mourn the loss of Bart, and had the good fortune of knowing Bart and his work. And I was thinking during that moment of silence, the irony is that that's probably longer than the cumulative amount of rest he took in his whole life, because he just was a worker. And he had no tolerance for those of us who were slow or who were not dedicated or loyal to the city. And he just left a wonderful example for me of hard work and dedication and just getting the job done no matter what it took. And we will sincerely miss him. Thank you.
Thank you. The first and only item of business tonight is a resolution approving a lease agreement pertaining to various Provo City streets and an interlocal cooperation agreement pertaining to the Provo-Orem Transportation Improvement project. This item will be presented by Brian Jones, our council attorney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the council, I think most of the public is probably aware of the proceedings that took place last week. In the wake of those proceedings, we circulated a draft of the current agreements in the early morning hours of last Tuesday night, and asked for any feedback by the end of the day on Wednesday. I received one comment from the city engineer regarding a small correction to the property description, and several comments and questions from Chair Santiago, which we then discussed with UTA, gathered some information, presented some information to Chair Santiago, and made a couple of revisions. Those revisions were all included in a draft that was then circulated to the council as of last Thursday evening and has been available for review. There were 3 changes made to the lease agreement based on those comments. One, as I mentioned, came from the city engineer and resulted in a one-word change to one of the property descriptions. The other was, as was actually discussed in last week's public meeting, the striking of the word substantially in paragraph 6A. And the final change was in paragraph 8B. There was a minor exception clause added that excluded the enhancement improvements on 900 East and 7th North from a kind of a standards issue. That it wasn't really clear that standards issue applied anyway, but we clarified that it wouldn't by just making an exception explicitly for those 2 paragraphs. And those are the changes since last week. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Other questions for Mr. Jones? Mr. Stewart?
Brian, do the enhancements on 9th East, are they part of the baseline? Because they're not so they're not part of the enhancements, they're part of the baseline.
Correct. By virtue of the definitions in 6A and 6B, of the lease agreement. They are included in the baseline. And furthermore, by virtue of paragraph 4 of the interlocal agreement, even to the extent that the executive committee created by that agreement has the power to make changes to the baseline, they can't make changes to the baseline that would affect those two areas or those two paragraphs that I just mentioned of the lease agreement.
Can we put Exhibit C up on the board so that we know what we're talking about? So what Mr. Jones is referring to is a hawk signal. It's a pedestrian-controlled signal on 700 North, and another one on University Parkway near the MTC, and then the frontage road on 900 East that will enter just north of Birch. It'll enter off of 9th East just north of Birch, and it'll come out just south of Fir Avenue. So this is the diagram of the frontage road on 900 East that we're referring to. And that's Exhibit C, correct? There was some difficulty attaching it electronically, but this will be attached to the actual agreement as Exhibit C.
And I should clarify, Councilmember Stewart, just to be clear, if this is a matter of discussion, that it is only by execution of the lease agreement that those improvements become part of the baseline. Otherwise, they are not.
Say that one more time, sorry.
It's only by approval of the lease agreement that those two items become part of the baseline. Without the lease agreement, they're not part of the baseline.
Then what is the baseline without? I mean, what is the baseline?
Without
Where do we find the baseline?
Without the lease agreement, the baseline is currently defined by the 60% drawings, soon to be the 90% drawings that UTA and the other agencies are working their way through.
We don't have a baseline today.
No, and that's precisely why the lease agreement is written the way that it is, because what the lease agreement actually says regarding the baseline is that the baseline will be based on the preliminary design drawings. It will absolutely include these improvements and the hawk signals that Chair Santiago just mentioned, but the lease agreement acknowledges that it will continue to be developed through the final design process, but the lease agreement itself is only valid if at the end of that final design process Provo City agrees to the final design and what the baseline is at that point.
Who in Provo City agrees?
At this point, the agreement says the city. By execution of the agreement, that becomes an administrative function.
Okay. So this is really the last look from the council point of view.
Yes.
So the baseline scope in 8B, it says that the baseline scope is defined by the finding of no significant impact. So the FONSI issued by the FTA on March 27th, 2015. And I think we have, that's just the alignment that you're referring to, right? That picture of the current alignment. I don't know if we have that to put up there,
It's Exhibit A.
but that's the baseline.
Inside the agreement. If you just go to the second to last page of the agreement.
While they're looking for that, there were a couple of questions in our last meeting that some residents asked about. One of those was, who are the signatories? In our last meeting, we learned that the county commissioner chair is not a signatory, but it's our understanding that everybody else on the executive committee is a signatory. Is that correct, Mr. Meyer? Okay. There's also a question about Provo, the council giving up their right to exercise eminent domain to UDOT. And in this agreement that addresses that, do you mind explaining that portion of the agreement?
Sure. So to the extent that there is property along the route that doesn't belong to the city, that what the agreement contemplates is that UDOT would, where necessary, exercise its right of eminent domain or condemnation to take those pieces of property. The agreement then contemplates those pieces of property would be deeded by UDOT to Provo, and then Provo would lease them to UTA for the purposes of this route. And the significance of that being that at the end of the lease agreement, then that property belongs to Provo. There was a comment, I'd clarify one thing about some of the discussion that happened last Tuesday. One of the reasons why Steve Sandberg and I had from Steve Sandberg from BYU and I had several conversations leading up into that meeting is he had pointed out that some of the property described in this agreement potentially included property belonging to BYU. However, UDOT and BYU have already agreed that UDOT will not be exercising any eminent domain over property that BYU owns, but BYU will be entering into a lease agreement similar to this lease agreement, leasing all of their property to UTA. And that was why last week we added that one sentence to the agreement that just said, to the extent that this describes BYU property, those provisions about UDOT condemning it and then transferring it to Provo don't apply.
Okay, thank you. And I'd like to clarify too, there was a little confusion over why I wanted to continue this item from last week to this week. And some thought it was just because of that last minute change that Brian made on behalf of BYU. And that was not it. There was another revision earlier that day at 10 o'clock and I hadn't had a chance to look at that revision. And we'd been in meetings all day and I just felt like this project is big enough and long-term enough that it merited a chance to look at it, not making 100+ people wait while we read an agreement that had that kind of impact. So those were my reasons for wanting to continue it to today, and I appreciate everyone's patience and my colleagues and their willingness to do that. So thank you.
Madam Chair, I have a question for UTA. Is that possible to ask them a question?
Sure. Did you want Mr. Turner or Mr. Meyer or?
Mr. Turner. The baseline now includes some things that were called previously enhancements, but they're not part of the current baseline. Is that true?
Could you say that again?
There are some items that we just talked about, like on 9th East, that were at one time enhancements, I think, but now are part of the baseline.
Correct.
That's correct. So they're enhancements because they make the project better?
We're calling them enhancements because originally they were not part of the baseline, and so that's a term that FTA refers to as items that we can add into the project, and so those have gone from enhancements over into, and we call them actually, I think, preferred enhancements or priority enhancements.
Do they make the
they're part of
project
that baseline.
Do they make the project better?
It's not necessarily better. It doesn't make it better. It's more of wish list items that stakeholders would like to have as part of the project.
Better for the people on 9th East, for example, on that one item?
This helps those people. It does not affect the bus traffic at all, but it does make it better for those seven houses along 9th East.
One of the concerns of some council members is that if we vote against this lease agreement, those enhancements or those now baseline items would go away. Why would that be if it makes the project better?
For the bus traffic itself, the enhancements, the improvement along 9th East does not affect our bus movement at all. That is basically, in the original document, originally in the design, we had a dedicated guideway along 9th East. We also had a station in front of the creamery, and we took those away because of the concerns of the citizens and the council, so we took those away. And then we added a 10-foot wide sidewalk -- bike path, similar as what's on the west side of the road. We added that to the east side of the road, and that was part of the baseline originally. And then it came up about the people backing out, and so we added that. So it's basically items that we've added to help the people along there. However, it does not affect our bus movement and how the buses and how our system functions along there. So to us as the bus movement through there, if it would be we don't need to have that to make the project for us better. It does help those 7 houses along there.
But if it made it better for the neighborhood, would you leave it in? No matter the condition?
Well, if we get the lease agreement, it'll definitely be put in.
But if the lease agreement wasn't approved, why would you take it out?
Because for us, for our bus system, we don't need it.
Even though it's better for the neighborhood?
That's subject to different points of view.
Okay, thank you.
Are there other questions? Mr. Connect?
So we have new leadership with the UTA, and I don't know if you can speak with any authority on the philosophy of the new leader going forward, considering the history of UTA in the past.
Well, we have an interim director right now, but maybe Steve wants to address that since he's closer to it.
So your question is to?
Well, considering the perception by many of UTA and not being a favorable perception, what do you think the new leadership will be doing to improve PR and run the organization differently?
Sure. Well, we have a strong board. We've made some changes in membership of our board, and our chairman, David Burton, has taken it to heart to address policies and issues related to the perceptions of UTA and particularly with trust. So he's met with a lot of the elected officials, a lot of the communities. Our staff has come up with a document that you may have seen that talks about initiatives that we've taken in place to address the trust issues. So, for example, the executive team is assigned to the different communities in the service area. I'm assigned to Provo City, so the mayor and Wayne are blessed with seeing me on a regular basis. You can say what you want, but that's an opportunity for us to interact more closely, get more feedback from the community. I attend the regional planning committee meetings on a monthly basis with the Mountain Lands Association of Government. We're trying to take that feedback. I think this project is a great example of the steps we're taking. The interlocal agreement, where we're partners with Orem, Provo, UDOT, our stakeholders, and Mountain Land Association of Governments to work together to make this project better. That's a big advancement for us. We've had interlocal agreements with the communities when we did the Frontrunner project, but not to the extent where we're making together the decisions on the key elements of these projects, the enhancements, because we think the stakeholders have a big role in helping manage the costs of the project, for good or ill. There's opportunities, there's going to be change orders. when we can bring the power of the staffs of all these entities together and come to a common solution that can save money and free up that contingency to do these things that these communities want to do, these enhancements, then that's for the benefit of everybody. So that's the type of approach. That's a change of approach. That's just one example of what we're doing. We're trying to make our board meetings more open, more inclusive, give more opportunities for public comment. We have some great new board members in Utah County, Sherry Everett Hall and Mayor Acerson from Linden. I think a very proactive, inclusive board that really wants to include the communities in our decisions.
So your committee, the six-member panel or committee that will oversee this, only lasts as long as the project is under construction?
No, we anticipate that that will go on through operations.
Okay.
This isn't just UTA's project. These are the community's projects. We have similar type relationships with the other communities that we go through with our light rail and bus rapid transit projects. We're continually talking to them about what are the issues they're seeing with operations, what changes could we make to make it better as time goes on, and we're able to make enhancements. We're improving Wi-Fi on Frontrunner, for example. That's a lot of the comments that people have heard, the elected officials have heard. They've passed that on to us. We've taken that to heart. We're making improvements like that.
I've heard people complain that that the current bus routes have changed or they're not convenient. I'm just wondering, if you have this backbone, are you going to then customize your routes to go out in the neighborhoods and bring people to the stations?
That's the intent. We do that with the resources that we have available. We try to be equitable with the monies, the local option sales taxes that are generated in each county to spend those dollars in the counties. And to the extent that we have budget available for service enhancements or increases, we make that. But we do, and we have made changes to bus routes. We have 3 change days a year, April, August, and December, where we're constantly looking and evaluating the timing of routes when they hit to the front runner stations, where they come from and where they go to, and we make those adjustments. Now, you have to be careful doing that because people come to depend, there's some people that depend on that route being there. You're going to affect people adversely or you're going to benefit other people. So we really tried to have public hearings for that process and now web-based open UTA dialogues where people can comment, and we try to come to the best decision to optimize ridership and benefit the community as a whole.
Thank you.
Mr. Stewart?
How will the defeat of Prop 1, where the extra property tax money is not coming to UTA, affect your service here in the county?
Well, we have the dollars that we currently have. Those would have been a local option sales tax, not a property tax. But we're making do with the service that we have.
Because you're committed 12 years from now to pay back the money that the bonding, so that's going to take money away from adding, my guess is at least adding improvements to other routes and things.
Well, we'll see. We think we can do that and certainly maintain the service that we have. With the growth in sales taxes, the communities grow. Our projections show that we can maintain what we have and operate the BRT and the commuter rail in Utah.
Maintain what you have? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Are there other questions for Mr. Meyer? Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from council members? Brian, I do have one other question for you. It's under number 4. Let's see, under the lease agreement, where it talks about no authority to act contrary to a lease agreement without consent.
Oh, you're talking about in the interlocal agreement?
Oh, I'm sorry, that's in the interlocal, yes.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Was
Could
was the
you just
question just to
explain
explain
that?
it?
Yeah.
Okay.
It looks as though, I know we've discussed this, what can or can't be changed, but it looks as though the executive committee can change something if it's, anyway, if you could explain
Yeah,
that.
let me walk through that. So the interlocal agreement, which is going to be signed by 5 of the 6 member agencies, excluding the county, which I'd comment again, and I think I mentioned this last week, that the county already has an interlocal agreement with UTA governing the relationship between the two of those. And that's, as I understand it, why they felt like they didn't need to be a signatory to this one as well. So the 6 members of the interlocal agreement, they have appointed designees that make up an executive committee. In paragraph 5 of the interlocal agreement, it defines the project baseline, and it defines that project baseline to be the same as included in the lease agreement. And, using the same definition as in the lease agreement. Then in 5.1.1, it specifically calls out those additions to the baseline that we just talked about in paragraphs 6A and 6B of the lease agreement. 5.1.2 plays the same role, but with regard to the Orem lease agreement, just for clarity. So both the lease agreement and the interlocal agreement include those project details on 900 East and 700 North and University Parkway as part of the project baseline. What paragraph 4 does is that if you look back up in 2.2.5, one of the things that the executive committee is granted authority to do under this interlocal agreement is to approve changes to the project baseline and the project scope where that's needed. So if they're coming in under budget and they have more money and they want to add things to the project baseline, the executive committee can do that and approve other changes. If you go back to paragraph, with that background, if you go back to paragraph 4, what paragraph 4 says is that regardless of what it just said up above in 2.2.5, the executive committee cannot make changes to the baseline that affect those specific improvements called out in paragraphs, for Provo's purposes, in paragraphs 6A and 6B of the lease agreement. And that changes to that part of the baseline can only happen if there's written consent of both parties. And because both Robert West, the city attorney, and I had discussed this, and I spoke with Chair Santiago about it earlier in the week, because that kind of change would actually, in our view, fundamentally alter the actual terms of the lease agreement itself, we believe that where it says written consent of both parties, that means from Provo's perspective, the council, and from UTA's perspective, the UTA board. And so that is the one area where this paragraph 4, which was actually inserted by Orem because they have very similar concerns about any of the things they negotiated to be included in the baseline scope not ever being able to be altered. And so that's the purpose of this paragraph 4, is to guarantee that those specific improvements remain in the baseline regardless of any other changes.
Thank you. Mr. Stewart?
I had a question that your comments brought up a question in my mind.
I don't think so.
Do I have a light, so I can't tell if it's on or off?
There you go.
Here it's on. The council on June 3rd, 2014 passed a resolution supporting a route. Right. Has anything else happened since then between UTA on the BRT as far as agreements go, or what are we operating under? Because that was an agreement just to approve a route, right? Or did it
Right.
include other things?
No, well, there wasn't even an agreement. There was a resolution passed by the council at that time supporting the use of what was then called Route 4, or the preferred local alternative, as the route that UTA would use for construction of BRT. At that point, no, up until this point, there have been no other agreements, formal agreements, or action of the council that has been contemplated. And the reason why action is contemplated now, so let me back up and preface this by saying the lease agreement itself is not necessary for operating buses on Provo streets. What it's necessary to do, why the lease agreement is being proposed is for two reasons. One, because it allows use of city streets for dedicated lanes on 700 North and University Parkway for a short distance. 900 North, right, yes, 700 North and 900 North. So the lease agreement is necessary if those streets are going to have exclusive lanes. It's not necessary if those streets don't have exclusive lanes. And then the other reason why it's necessary or desired from a UTA perspective is that the value of the lease contributes to the local match, and therefore it's not actual, it makes up an amount of money that the local government doesn't actually have to come up with dollars in order for the federal funding, the federal matching funds to be given to the project.
So UTA, we just need an agreement from, for example, UDOT to put stations on University Avenue.
Correct.
So really, the lease agreement just gives them the right to use the dedicated lanes.
Well, two things. Dedicated lanes on 700 North and 900 North, and areas that are necessary for stations along the route within Provo, not on state-owned property like University Avenue.
So on those two routes, we're just talking those two roads, they could not do stations there without this agreement.
Right. If the agreement didn't exist, UTA could still operate buses up and down those streets, and UDOT could still condemn property along those streets to build stations or figure out a way to do, I don't think you could do actual bus rapid transit without building the stations. But in any event, yes, they could still operate buses along those roads, but they couldn't do it using exclusive lanes, and they couldn't count the value of that right as part of the local matching funds.
But they could build stations given on those routes. I don't quite understand how.
Right, so they could still, remember that I explained earlier, and I don't know if we need Dave Graves to show us on the diagram which parts of the property Provo already owns and which part is private, but remember that as I explained earlier that what the agreement contemplates is where necessary for stations to be built on private property, UDOT will exercise power of eminent domain and then transfer that property to Provo for the purposes of leasing back to UTA. UDOT could still exercise that right even without the lease agreement.
So they could help the route have stations by using their eminent domain power.
Correct.
Okay.
But that would potentially eat into the cost of the project because there wouldn't be local match funds to offset that, because there would, and Provo wouldn't end up owning the property after whatever this is ends.
Right. Thank you.
Could I ask a quick clarification on that? When talking about UDOT, you've said a couple times, they could exercise the condemnation and acquire that property through eminent domain. Correct me if I'm wrong, their purpose would be to acquire the property, and if necessary, they could resort to condemnation. But most likely, the practice has always been first to just negotiate to acquire the property. And so that condemnation is kind of a last resort.
Correct. And I'm essentially just kind of talking worst case scenarios. And I'm sure that Gray could address this. My understanding is, without knowing the details, that most of the property owners along the route have already been contacted, and there's already, if not actual agreements, tentative agreements about valuation for acquiring those properties.
Are there further questions or comments? Mr. Winterton?
Yes, Brian, you sent out a letter with regard to the voting issues of the public.
With regard
Making
to,
it
with regard to making it putting the
on
making
a
it a
ballot.
ballot proposition.
Correct.
Okay.
And I understood everything but the bonding part. Can you explain the bonding part to me about the bonding part? Because UTA would be bonding for some of those payments.
Well, my intent, and what I was trying to say is that if you look at the state code definition of a ballot proposition, one of the things that is a listed ballot proposition is a bonding proposition. So the point that I was trying to make there is that if the city were bonding, then that is something that the municipal council of Provo could put on a ballot proposition, would be to ask whether or not that bond should be issued. I didn't mean to say that other entities couldn't put the bonding question on the ballot if they wanted to. The point was that Provo is not bonding for this project, so there's not a bonding proposition for Provo to initiate.
Thank you.
Mr. Stewart?
Brian,
Yes.
conversations with some state legislators, they feel like a resolution, I mean, it could go to a vote of the people. So is this just, why is there this difference?
Without talking to them, I don't know what their reasons for saying that are. All I can tell you is that if you look at the definition of ballot proposition in the state code, the only 2 of the 8 listed purposes that actually would originate with the city are bonding propositions or opinion questions, and it says, quote, specifically authorized by the legislature. And in speaking with the elections officers from the Lieutenant Governor's office, they have also, based on that same statute, said that it is their opinion, and that they have told repeatedly other cities who have asked the same question, that opinion questions cannot go on to the ballot unless they are one that is specifically authorized by the legislature. So now that does, as I think I commented both in my email and last time, none of that discussion centers around whether citizens can sometimes put things on the ballot, but I'm talking solely about things that the council could put on the ballot.
Oh, so the citizens could question a legislative decision that we make tonight on the ballot?
They could if the decision made tonight were to fall under the lawmaking power that the citizens retain under the state constitution. Now the question becomes, is the resolution tonight to approve a lease and interlocal agreement an exercise of a lawmaking power? According to Utah Supreme Court cases that were discussed back when in 2014 when the previous resolution was passed, I don't believe that's the case. Those cases refer to the principle that the council is only exercising first of all, that the citizens' right to put something on a ballot is contingent upon what they want to put on the ballot being an exercise of lawmaking power, and that the council's action is only a lawmaking power, an exercise of lawmaking power, if it creates a new law. If instead it is an exercise of administrative oversight based on a current law, then it's not an exercise of lawmaking power. So without having delved into this or read every initiative and referendum case that there is, I would say that so far my opinion would be that what the council is doing tonight is exercising authority granted to it under provisions of city code that require long-term commitments of the city and disposition of city property to be approved by council action, and therefore that is an exercise of the council's administrative power under those existing laws, not the creation of a new law.
So who would determine whether something be put on the ballot?
Well, let me just parse it real quickly. You'll recall that there are initiatives and a referendum. And for those that aren't acquainted with the difference, an initiative is an exercise of lawmaking power that the citizens desire to initiate that the council has not even had anything to do with. The citizens want to create a new law. A referendum, which would be more likely the issue here, is when citizens want to overturn a lawmaking an exercise of the lawmaking power that the council has already done. So under state statute, the way that happens is if a private citizen believed that the council had exercised a lawmaking power that they wanted to challenge, They would go to the city recorder within a certain time period, notify the city recorder that they intended to try to secure enough petition signatures to put that on the ballot. They would then, the city recorder does not actually review the question at that point. They give the person the petition forms, and the person would go out and go to the effort of securing all of the petitions, all of the signatures that they could. If they secured sufficient signatures during the required time period and turned them back into the city recorder would then be faced with the decision of certifying the question onto the ballot or not, which would be the point at which the city recorder would have to make a decision as to whether they felt like that item, the petition actually reflected a lawmaking power exercised by the council. And right, yeah. And I hadn't gone through every step, but Ms. Weiss points out correctly that there's also a step where the city recorder has to verify the signatures of all the petitioners. But the point I was trying to make was that the final determination, or I guess I shouldn't say final, the initial determination of whether the petition actually reflects a proper ballot proposition question is made by the city recorder after the signatures have all been collected and after they have been verified. And if the city recorder determined that it was a valid ballot proposition, it would go onto the ballot pending a legal challenge. If the city recorder determined that it was not a valid exercise of the lawmaking power, it would not go on the ballot pending the result of a legal challenge to try to force it to be put on the ballot.
There could be a legal challenge either way.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I have another question. This is probably for Mr. Turner. In the fifth whereas paragraph of the interlocal agreement, it mentions, whereas the parties further anticipate that the lease agreements will address many of the issues that are critical to the implementation of the project, including, but not limited to, BRT lane alignment, landscaping, station location, light rail compatibility, and then it goes on. What would that look like in regards to light rail compatibility? What would you be doing any differently in that regard?
Those items come from Orem, specifically from their city council resolution they passed, I think, 6 or 7 years ago, which one of them meant, or they had in there that any design the BRT would have would be light rail compatible. And so, but what that is where we have the dedicated lanes, if we were to run light rail in those dedicated lanes, do we already have the widths that we need? And with the width that we need for the BRT will accommodate the light rail lanes, the lines, except for at station locations where we would need some additional width for that. And so that's really all that was meant by that, would be that if we did come through with light rail in this alignment where there were dedicated lanes, that it would go in that same alignment.
Okay. When in our early discussions a couple of years ago, there were concerns that light rail would follow the same path through Provo and that it would go on 700 North and 9th East and University Parkway. And there were, we were told that that wouldn't be the case, that if light rail were to go through Provo, it would probably stay on University Avenue and then go to University Parkway. So that one part caused
Well,
a little bit of concern, just having it in there. I don't know if we strike it or if anyone really wants it in there. I don't know.
I don't think it doesn't mean anything as far as the BRT design will not be changed at all.
Okay, it's just the width. That's all you're looking at.
Exactly.
But if you're taking more property on 700 North where it's not necessary, is that the case? Would that be the case if you were making
7th
it?
North right now has a pretty wide right-of-way. We have some very small right-of-way takes on 7th North because the sidewalk, it has a very large park strip in it right now, and so we're able to do some widening on 7th North without acquiring right-of-way up and down the whole thing. So, we have not looked at a light rail design at all through Provo or Orem or through Utah County. I mean, it's rumored, or not rumored, but it's in maybe a long-range plan. So when that happens, we would look at, the actual alignment for light rail. And when you look at light rail, does it make sense to wind up around the 7th North and 9th East, or does it make, do we keep it on University Avenue? I can't say that right now because we haven't looked at it or planned that out at all, so.
But it doesn't change what you're doing, whether we
Not at
have
all.
this in the agreement or not in the agreement doesn't change what you're doing, what you'll be doing. Okay, thank you.
The only thing I would mention, Madam Chair, is the interlocal agreement will need to be adopted by all the parties, and this was a prerequisite for Orem City Council to vote for it. So again, I think if it doesn't change anything, it doesn't guarantee that light rail will go along this alignment. It just says that when we build BRT, we build sufficient width to handle a future light rail alignment. So it's not a guarantee that that would be the alignment at all. But again, I think it is important to Orem, and so if it doesn't really change the design, I think it'd be preferable to leave it in the whereas in the interlocal. Because again, Orem City Council also has to adopt and approve the interlocal. They don't have to adopt and approve our lease agreement. That's exclusively ours.
What happens if they make changes tonight to the lease agreement? Because they're meeting.
Well, to the interlocal, then they would have to come back here to get approval of any changes, just as we would if we made changes to
So
it tonight.
they would delay their vote in order to do that?
Well, that's a good question. I think what would happen is if they made some changes to the interlocal tonight and you adopted the interlocal tonight, then we would have to resolve that conflict, and one or the other would have to make a change. So we just have to come back and revisit it if that's the case. So again, I think the intent on both sides, both Orem and Provo, is to take the drafted interlocal agreement as it exists and try to make that the action that's taken by both city councils tonight.
And they, like you, it was presented to them over the last several weeks, the draft forms, and to collect comments from them. So they've had the adequate time to. So it was the interlocal agreement, same interlocal agreement that you have, plus their lease agreement, same interlocal, and then your lease agreement. So if there were changes to that, then it would have to come to you. But we've made the changes back and forth between the cities, and so we've got it to where they're actually debating it right now or in about 10 minutes.
I'd also point out, Madam Chair, that because that phrase, and the only place it occurs is in this paragraph, is in the preamble, it doesn't actually create anything legally binding. Basically, all it says by Orem putting the phrase in there is that they expect that the design is going to consider light rail compatibility, and then it'd be up to the executive committee to actually make anything happen.
Okay. Thank you. Are there other questions or comments? Well, I would just like to express my appreciation to the administration, Mayor, for working out the agreement in a way that we had discussed 2 years ago. Those things were included in the resolution of support 2 years ago, and appreciate UTA being willing to come to the table and making those work and answering all of our questions. Had lots of questions. A couple that we didn't mention were just the roadway, that we're not giving up the roadway, we're not giving up the utility easement under the roadway, which is important, and we're not giving up the utility above the roadway. The utilities on 700 North will be moved with project money. There were lots of questions that maybe haven't even been discussed except for that one last week, but lots of questions and things addressed, and I just want to express my gratitude to UTA and to Chad Eccles from MAG, and Dave Graves, who's our engineer. He's going to be in the throes of this, has been and will be through to the end as part of our project team. And if this goes through, this interlocal agreement goes through, he would be part of that project team. And anyway, at this point, I just want to express appreciation to you for making this all work if it passes. So. Mr. Harding?
Last week, several council members kind of took the indulgence of kind of talking through what they were thinking about, and we kind of ended before I had that opportunity. But partly, council members said some things that I was thinking very clearly, which I appreciated. A couple things that I thought in particular that Mr. Sewell commented on that I thought I had similar sentiment about the route. I likewise am not convinced that this is the best route, but it's the route that we've got in front of us. I was even more disappointed with the stakeholder public input process that we went through just before the approval of that route, and I hope that UTA can take a look at that and have a better process as they're improving other things that they're working on. I also appreciated what he talked about. What is the question that we're looking at? 2 years ago, the council took a lot of pain to go through a lot of this project in detail, and in the end voted for the project and for the route. And though I don't think it's the best route, but that was the decision of the council. And I really see that tonight's vote is not a vote on the project itself, but a vote on how to best manage the project and how to move forward with the management of the project. I do believe that the city signaled our intent 2 years ago. There have been no large revelations in the meantime that I think should cause us to rethink the commitment that we made there. Nothing was big enough to justify a change. I appreciated. I want to echo the thoughts of Gary Winterton the last time, talking about opportunities and missed opportunities. So I will, but he said it so eloquently, I'll just second what he said and appreciate his thoughts on that. We have talked about whether this should go to the public for a vote. I think it's easy to look back and say, well, we don't have time to do it now, but we should have done it 2 years ago. But having been a part of that process 2 years ago on the Transportation and Mobility Advisory Committee, I knew that back then even it would have been difficult to go to the public for a vote. It's easy to say, well, yeah, if we had done it, back then, but at the time, even then, it would not have been easy. There's discussion about, well, we fund road projects with public money, and we don't vote on that. I don't believe we had a public referendum on the I-15 core project or the Pioneer Crossing project. So similarly, if we have already voted to put a portion of our sales tax towards transit, why would we send every project to the public to vote? In some discussions with some other council members, it kind of indicated maybe this is a special project, and I think it is a special project because I do think it makes a big impact on our city and on our downtown. And so from that perspective, I think this isn't just a standard transit project, and so maybe it makes sense for the public to weigh in on it. But then I started thinking a bit about our form of government, about that we are a democratic republic. We have elected officials to represent the people, and though the people that have sat through these last two meetings might disagree, but the council is supposed to help us to be more agile. A council can be more agile than sending votes to the public every time a project needs to be approved. The timing, even 2 years ago, this is a project that's been long in the works, but the funding, the availability of the funding for not only the federal money, but also the willingness of the county as a whole, the elected officials across the county who were willing to support the project, the window of opportunity that we had would not have made it convenient, would not have made it probably possible to go to a public vote, a public vote. And so I think that's when the representatives of the people are called upon to make these difficult decisions. And I think that that is exactly what the council did 2 years ago. Final thought, it would also be easy to just state that, well, BRT is going to happen anyway. These agreements are going to give us a seat at the table and will give us the best project. I think that's all true. It'd be easy to say, well, that's the reason why I'm voting for it. But I do want to go on the record that I am voting. I'm voting for the agreements for those reasons. But if I was here 2 years ago, or if this was a vote on the project itself, I would be voting for the project. Nothing is ever certain, but from the study that we've done, the study that many people have done, gives me high confidence that this is going to be a project that will benefit the Provo community in perpetuity. It is establishing a backbone for our transit system that will, it's just a first step, in my opinion. We need more, but it is an important base on which we will be able to build the ribs of our bus lines. It will allow us to diversify our transportation system to give people options. And so I just wanted to voice my support. I think this will be a very good project, and I think we will need more of this so that we can maintain our high quality of life, even as our county as a whole continues to grow. And so I'm grateful as well to the administration. I'm grateful to UTA. I'm grateful to the county. I'm grateful to MAG and Orem as well. I'm grateful for the great work that has been put into this. I have to say the 60% design that I've seen, much better than the 30%. I think they've been listening to the concerns and of the community and have put that in. I think overall, some wonderful work has gone into this, and I look forward to partnering with these entities in the future to help us to provide a well-functioning transportation system for our citizens in the future. Thanks.
Can I ask you a question, David?
Yes, please.
Why do you think we went to a vote on Academy Square?
Well, I imagine we were bonding money for that project.
You think that was the only reason?
I wasn't here when that issue went to a vote.
The reason it went to a vote, because it was so divisive. We wanted to know the voice of the people. And that was a project that has less effect, quite frankly, on the city than this will. So I guess I would argue with you, using the word argue with you, that this project is not one that should have gone to the people and could have gone to the people. I've made that argument in press releases and in comments in this meeting. I just think anytime we feel we know better on this kind of major project than the people, we're in trouble. And in addition to that, this might not be the time, but I have made comments in 2 press releases. I'd like them part of the record, so I don't have to read them tonight. I don't think you want to. I think everyone has access to them. If it's okay, Madam Chair, I'd like to make those part of the record.
Sure. Are there other comments?
I have one more comment, I'm sorry.
Mr. Stewart?
My brain doesn't work quite as fast as it used to. I think we are voting on the project tonight. I really believe that if we don't vote for the lease, there's a possibility the project might not go forward. That has been admitted to by the administration and by UTA. So we are voting on the project. I didn't have a chance to vote 2 years ago, But I was elected, and my constituency, which is citywide, in fact, the press release went out today and my phone went crazy. I had 52, by 5:30, I had 52 responses, 49 against, 2 for, and 1 just saying thanks for the information. So I think we are, you might not want to be voting for the project, but I think we are because there's a possibility, at least, admitted by all, that it might not go ahead if we voted against this because of 2 issues. Dedicated roadway, we go under the necessary federal guidelines, and also for matching grant, we go under the federal guidelines. So there would have to be work done on those 2 issues.
Mr. Harding?
I would agree that if we voted against the agreements, there is a possibility that the project would not go forward. I agree that there is that possibility. I don't think it's a strong possibility. I think a much stronger probability is that the project will go forward and will be not as beneficial to our community. And so even if I was against the project, I would have a hard time voting against the agreements for that reason. I think the much more probable outcome, and we're just talking probabilities, but the much more probable outcome would be a worse project that still goes forward. We have been lobbied this past couple of weeks. We have had the community reach out to us. Some of what we hear is determined by the audience of things like press releases and emails that go not to the general population but to subsections of the population. If we want to go into numbers, I could report on the comments that I've received from not press releases but blog posts, and I could report back on the number of Facebook likes that certain things have received, which, if you took those in a vacuum, would indicate that the Provo population as a whole is generally for the project. So I do think we have to be careful about we need to exercise caution in ascribing what we hear to the whole of Provo's population. Even if we were to have a public vote on this based on our voter turnout, you could still say that we'd only be hearing from a small portion of our population.
That's the case in yours and mine election also, right?
Sorry, that's
It's the same case in yours and mine election.
that is correct.
Right.
I agree.
I still think the public is always entitled to a vote if it's possible, and it's always preferable and I've heard that from other council members that might be voting for, that it would have been preferable if we could have had a public vote on this.
Mr. Sewell?
Madam Chairman, I'd like to get a motion on the table, not to cut off debate, but just to get that on the table. I'd like to make a motion that we approve a resolution approving a lease agreement pertaining to various Provo City streets and an interlocal cooperation agreement pertaining to the Provo-Orem Transportation Improvement Project. So that's my motion. And then just a suggestion, just as a point of procedure, that we allow each council member who has not yet expressed their opinion their opportunity to make their statement before we proceed with the vote.
Thank you, Mr. Sewell. Is there a second? Thank you, Mr. Harding. And conversation? Mr. Connect?
Yeah, this is not an easy vote. I certainly appreciate and echo or feel the sentiments of a lot of the people that have written or that I know that are not happy with our current bus system. They're not happy with UTA. They are skeptical that this is going to work. Feel like it's taxation without representation. I hear all those things, and I did my best to reach out to my constituents to find out, and I've got about 500 email addresses that I can poll. And I was very concerned to hear how they felt. I didn't know if it would come back like the election in the fall with 57% opposing the new sales tax. But that was really kind of a whether you call that a confidence vote on UTA, that was separate from our particular dilemma here. Where do we go forward with this project? And a lot of the people that responded to me, the majority actually are in favor of mass transit, but the vote came down to 50-50 because they don't like this particular project for whatever reason. So that didn't leave me with a particular mandate as a representative, and I felt I needed a real mandate in order to upset the apple cart and derail what has been gone forth for the last 2 years in good faith based on everything that the city had voted on and agreed to and negotiated with the different parties involved. So yeah, I'll be voting for this, but it's not like I'm thrilled. It's difficult.
Are there other comments? Mr. Van Buren?
Mainly in response to Mr. Sewell's request that all of us maybe share our feelings. I was not a strong supporter of BRT 2 years ago. I did vote for the route because that vote was on the route, and I saw that the discussion was about the route, and I'll vote for the route. As this discussion came now to vote on the interlocal agreement and the lease agreement, again, I had some hesitations on the 50-year time period on a lease agreement. I didn't feel comfortable with that. I actually had a conversation with the mayor and told him, Mayor, I won't vote against this over that lease agreement. And the mayor was really good to sit down and talk and have a long discussion. As the public began to weigh in, I received so many emails and so many phone calls about the agreement, but it became a discussion about BRT, about the whole project. And I couldn't ignore that. And I felt I need to represent my constituents. And they were not people who were always politically motivated. They were people who were very quiet most of the time. Neighbors and friends that really don't ever express many feelings. But they came out at this point in time. And so I had to stop and listen and say, okay, now what do I do? And then I went back to my core values and said, okay, I've heard my constituents. I know what my gut feeling is. What do you really believe in? And it came down to a couple things. One is, what's the proper role of government, and how do we protect the funds that our taxpayers, our citizens pay? And I looked at the issue and I said, okay, again, this is not having to do with the lease agreement or the interlocal agreement, with the exception of the 50-year period. This shifted to the BRT project. And very many of my constituents said that the current bus system in our community is so inefficient, how can you support more of the same? Now, it's not the same, but it's managed by the same people. And how do they justify spending another $150 million for another system that if managed and if the expectation is the same, the efficiency will probably be close to the same? And then I've always argued that public transportation is heavily subsidized project. That's what public transportation is. It's always going to be heavily subsidized, and I've never agreed with that. And we hear about the success of Front Runner and Trax and the other systems that are in place because they are being used, they are being ridden, but the part that always gets me is every time someone gets on Trax, or every time someone gets on the Front Runner, every time somebody gets on a UTA bus, there's somewhere between $4.50 and $7.50 subsidy that comes from the taxpayer to allow that person to ride that bus. And that doesn't fit with my proper role of government. And so that came up too, and as I started going through these issues, as I reasoned through them, I kept falling away from supporting the BRT. I have concern about how it'll affect our city, how it'll affect University Avenue, how it'll affect 700 North. I drive on 700 North, 10 or 15 times a week. And as I was there this last week and looking at, I'm guessing that most of those trees are going to be taken down because they've got to expand that right of way. They're in the right of way, and it's in the large planting strip that we have. That the trees there are mature trees. They have a canopy over that. I'm worried about the traffic on 700 North, and I know the whole principle of BRT system is the congestion will go down. I'm not sure statistics prove that out. 2 lanes out of 700 North for buses will really limit what the cars can do. And also the traffic for pedestrians on 700 North is north and south and not east and west. And all those students that every day travel back and forth will have more to manipulate through. Now we're going to have one crossing, but all the students don't cross 700 North on 4th East. They don't, and they won't, and so some concerns there. So the last issue that came to my mind is, as we're discussing as a council on our housing policy and high-density living, one of the principles of bus rapid transit or any public transportation system is that it provides opportunities for what they call TOD or transit-oriented development, which to make it, public transportation work, the people need to live by the stations and by the system so that they can live, get on the bus, and go to their destination without having to travel, without having to go anywhere. And I think as a council right now, we're having a struggle on where we want to see this high-density housing, and we've not come to a recommendation or a solution, but we're approving a transportation system that will put pressure on the areas where our stations are to develop that way. I think that's a reality. That's a positive that most public transportation systems espouse as they try and sell the transportation system. And I'm concerned about that because a lot of the area where bus rapid transit will be going will not be places where you don't want high-density housing. And so therefore, I will not be voting for the interlocal agreement or the lease agreement tonight. For those reasons, and again, it's more of a BRT support or non-support more than the agreement themselves, except for the 50-year thing. Thank you.
Mr. Winterton?
Yes, I had the opportunity last week to express my views, and I have, Kay, I very much respect you, and you've been consistent all the way through, and I'm grateful for that consistency and your views. You've given me a lot to think about, and I'm grateful for those thoughts. I am someone that has lived in Provo all my life and still believe in this city. It's going to grow. I want my children here. I believe in this project. I'm not sure, I don't have any proof that it's going to be good, but I look at the numbers, studied them very deeply, and I believe in this. And so I think it's best for our community. Ultimately, do I think it's got challenges? Absolutely. Do I worry about it? Absolutely, and then some. But I still believe in it. And I look forward to this as an opportunity for Provo to take care of some needs that we have. I think of what happened today with BYU purchasing, what's announced today that they'll purchase Provo High. I see greater needs for BYU and transportation and opportunities for people to use this system. I believe it will work, and I look forward to being accountable for these decisions over the next few years, and I take that responsibility and look forward to the opportunity to be accountable to that.
Mr. Sewell?
I think I shared most of my feelings about the project last week, and I think a lot of you were here, so I won't repeat those comments, but I do have a few more thoughts. As I was coming in, I was shaking hands with a few of our residents, and one that I haven't shaken hands with before was very enthusiastic and telling me how much he loves to live in Provo. And I thought, I feel the same way. It's a wonderful place to live. I appreciate all of you, and I echo all of the people that Chair Santiago thanked in her comments. But I appreciate all of you residents who participated in this issue. It's been a tough one for us. It's been a divisive one. Initially, 2 years ago, we were receiving an onslaught of emails similar to what we've received in the past 2 weeks, but it was more in favor, as opposed to more recently, it's been more against. But there are a lot of people, a lot of residents that feel strongly on both sides of this issue. My personal feeling is that this will be a good project for our city. Like Mr. Harding, I thought there was a route that was maybe a little better, but that's, 2 years ago. One of the votes I'm proudest of that I took some flack over was the vote to do a second opinion independent study. And I've since learned that it's kind of hard to find. I'm not even sure if it's on our website anywhere, but if you really want to dig into the nitty-gritty details, I'd be happy to send you a copy of it. But that actually gave me a lot more confidence, because we were hearing 2 years ago, these arguments about there's not very many people on the buses, are the ridership estimates accurate? And that was one of the reasons why, in addition to looking at different route choices, why we wanted this second opinion. And it does validate that Route 4 is, for all practical purposes, as good as any of the other options that were looked at. So partly as a result of that investment, we ended up voting unanimously 2 years ago to move ahead. I too wish that the people had been able to vote on it. Mr. Jones last week tried to help me feel a little better about that, saying that would have been difficult. And I'm not sure even now if it could have been done or how it could have been done, but I wish we had made that effort to explore that possibility. But the decision about whether we're going to do BRT or not, I feel was made 2 years ago. A lot of things have happened. A lot of money has been spent. A lot of investment decisions have been made. Multiple government entities at several different levels have relied on that decision. So I think, even though I'm in favor of the project, if I wasn't, I would still want to vote to approve the lease, because I think it gives us the best project possible. And while I agree that voting against the lease might kill the project, there is that possibility that it's far more likely that it would proceed in a way that is not as beneficial to Provo. And so I'm supporting the lease for both of those reasons. My last comment is I just hope and issue a plea that this could mark a point where we could move forward and try to come together on this as much as possible. I hope that we will respect each other's viewpoints, recognize that there are great citizens all over the map in terms of how they viewed this issue, and I just appreciate everyone who contributed in any way to the dialogue. Thank you.
Are there other comments, Mr. Harding?
I've already said much of what I'd like to say, but I do want to make it clear that while I support this project and do believe it's in the best interest of our future, this has not been an easy vote. This is not, this has kind of been somewhat of a harrowing experience. I have received a lot of email, and really I have not spent any time, any substantial time on any city issues in the past 2 weeks. All of my time has gone into reading every single one of the email that I've received. I've carefully considered what they've said, and I've spent a lot of time responding to those emails. I have not gotten through all of them yet. I'm still working through a few. But probably 95% I've been able to respond to, and there's 2 conversations have sparked from those with a lot of back and forth. And like Mr. Sewell, I do appreciate the willingness of citizens to engage on these on these issues, on these projects. We do hear, we do listen, we do carefully consider the voices, and we balance that against the things that we've studied, the things that we've learned, and all of this, I believe, goes into the way that we'll be voting tonight. I'll leave that one alone, so thank you.
I'd like to add, after listening to some of the comments, I agree, and I have said many of the comments that Mr. Van Buren has made myself, and when it comes to a vote of the people, Mr. Stewart, if a project of this magnitude could have gone to a vote of the people, that would have been preferable. But I would have preferred that it happened 10 or 15 years ago when we were at the beginning of the project and not to this point. And so my focus has been, because we are at this point, my focus has been making sure that the lease agreement has what it needs to have in there for our needs, to best serve our city. And I neglected to mention that 2 years ago, much of the conversation was on the alignment, and there is a part of this agreement, number 17, that talks about the alignment. And if we choose as a city, it says in 17B, UTA will not disapprove of Provo's request to change the route of the BRT system under the following conditions, and it lists 6 conditions, which are: the legislative body of Provo makes a finding after a public hearing that the new proposed route has a greater public benefit than the then existing route. And then it lists some qualifiers, right? So it has to be approved by the National Environment Policy Act and our processes. It has to comply with FTA processes, and it has to be approved by other interested parties, county and UDOT. And those parties have to agree on the funding for the realignment. And then Provo would have to take care of removing those the enhancements that have already been put down and finding a way to pay for that. So these there are safeties built into this agreement, and I feel that if we don't approve these agreements, the project probably goes forward, is what my feeling is. I know that there's a possibility that it wouldn't, but I feel, and what I've seen over the past 2 years, is that the project goes forward and Provo's just left in a very vulnerable position. And so that's why I have focused on the lease agreement. That's why I find it very important, and not that it's perfect and not that we can catch everything, but I feel like the parties have come together in good faith and understand what we want to do moving forward, and that's what's important to me at this point. So, are there other comments? Mr. Stewart?
I just need to make one more. I just thank you, Kay, for your comments. Much of what you said was what I would have said or have said, so thank you.
So we have a motion on the from Mr. Sewell, and we have a second from Mr. Harding, and the motion was to accept the resolution as written. If we can put that back up on the board. Correct, Mr. Sewell? Is that what the motion
Yes.
is given? Okay. So we have a motion, we have a
Chair
second.
Santiago, could we have that read back? I just would like to have that, make sure that it was very clear to everyone at this point.
Sure. Would you like to read that again, Mr. Sewell?
My motion was to approve a resolution approving a lease agreement pertaining to various Provo City streets and an interlocal cooperation agreement pertaining to the Provo-Orem Transportation Improvement Project, as written and as has been displayed on the screen during the meeting.
Thank you.
Any further conversation on the motion? All in favor? Those in favor are Mr. Connect, Mr. Sewell, Ms. Santiago, Mr. Winterton, and Mr. Harding. Those opposed? Mr. Stewart and Mr. Van Buren. Thank you. A call for a motion to adjourn the Provo Municipal Council meeting.
Madam Chair,
Oh.
if I might, just as a point
Oh,
of
the
procedure.
motion carries, sorry.
Oh, yes, but in addition to that, I think we do need to note for the record that the council was gathered in a closed session prior to this and recessed that meeting is going back into it. So rather than adjourning,
Oh, okay.
if the motion could be to recess from this open meeting and reconvene in closed session.
Okay. Is there a motion to that effect? Thank you, Mr. Winterton. Is there a second? Thank you, Mr. Connect. All in favor? Thank you. The voting is unanimous in the affirmative. Thank you.